Oh, the theater. Nothing grants one a taste of humanity more than stained, sticky floors, soiled seats, the non-stop crinkling of candy wrappers, and occasionally getting caught in the high beams of one peon's cell phone. It's a magical place, one where people are brought together with a common interest yet often sit in disdain at the discourteous nature of others. It is then that they realize these walking flesh puppets, although necessary, are better taken in small doses. Then, as they look around the cinema, they also realize that they too are just another meat sack thrust into the fray that is human life. The mirror shatters, and they parade out with the rest of the cattle as the closing credits drift up the screen. As a demon, I find this intoxicating, and I had one such venture just the other night as I took a late viewing of the exceptional Dune Part 2, The Sandadine. And oh, what a treat we had. My slaves were clapping and shouting in joy at the grand battles and epic spacefaring machinery that blasted all manner of noise from the speakers. I bought out the theater, you see. Had to make sure we had no further scandalous incidents involving rampaging slaves pleasuring themselves in front of old couples. What can I say? I like to let my pets roam free from time to time. But I digress. Dune Part 2 was a fantastic film. My concubine and I never had a moment to take our eyes off the screen. Each and every scene was encapsulating, intriguing, and often just plain fun. Having never read the books, but being somewhat familiar with the older film and television series, I consider these new versions to be the superior of the lot. Each has their charm, mind you, but Denis Villeneuve, these human monikers, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, but his vision of the book seems to be the most authentic and respectful to the source material. Again, I am not familiar with the book, so I could be completely wrong here, but that was my impression. I felt that Dune Part 1 and 2 were more a labor of love than what we normally see in big-budget films as of late. For starters, the characters are thoroughly enjoyable. Timothée Chalamet surprised me. I didn't expect this young, pretty boy with such thin features to present such a commanding presence as a prophetic entity come to save the universe. Although his performance in The King was nothing to sneer at either. Perhaps I'm too quick to judge. But along this luscious specimen, we have the likes of Josh Brolin, Rebecca Ferguson, who nearly stole the show, Dave Bautista, the great Stellan Skarsgård, and Javier Bardem, who portrayed who I think is my favorite character in the film, Stilgar, the hilarious yet dangerous fundamentalist who goes out of his way to believe in the prophecy. Reminds me of some of my old friends in the more biblical times. We also have some short scenes with the eclectic Anya Taylor-Joy and God King Christopher Walken, long may he reign. But I think most notable of all was the performance by one Austin Butler, who plays the sadistic and psychopathic Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen, heir to the Harkonnen throne. Truly a savage being, he emits a most powerful presence that finds one tensing the lower cheeks while simultaneously feeling a stirring in the loins. He even manages to imitate Skarsgård's grisly voice and speech patterns. His screen time was a most joyous treat, if not somewhat diminished. Oh, and there's also Zendaya. She's in this too, for those who care. Anywho, Dune Part 2 is rife with spectacle and political intrigue. There were a few surprise moments in the writing that I wasn't expecting, and it all culminates in an epic battle that still manages to set up a sequel. And speaking of epic battles, there are many abound in this grandiose feature. My only regret is not watching the film on IMAX because it was created for features like this. The grand vision of these massive armies, phenomenal sandworms, gigantic ships, arenas, cities, and spice mining equipment really brings out the giddy inner infant demon in me, reminding me of my youth back in hell, observing a giant fireworm carve its way through the crowds of punished sinners. Oh, to be young again. But that's why I watch these films, to get that little taste of magic that we all held so dear when roaming our homes in stuffed diapers and soiled pajamas, or in my case, tattered loincloth. And Dune Part 2 instilled that within me. The sound design alone is something to praise in all its glory. The lung-collapsing horns and throat-singing when Harkonnen armies are amassing. The frightful boom of an explosion when the Fremen are sabotaging spice mining equipment. The scarring winds cutting across the sands during a storm. It was all magnificently manifested and caused my concubine many gasps and ahs. If only she could witness where I grew up. In time. Despite the length of the film going nigh on 3 hours, the pacing was stable and never felt like it was dragging on, although during the latter third of the film it may have felt a wee bit rushed, but nothing to truly complain about in all honesty, and with the massive amount of characters in the film, it was a little bit spread thin, I suppose you could say, when it comes to development. I did feel some segments could have been a bit more fleshed out, but that would ask for an even longer runtime. And although I am immortal and have all the time in the universe, I suspect you humans wouldn't be as patient. Pitiful short lives. The action scenes and fights are a joy to witness. They manage a fine balance between sci-fi laser warfare and boots-on-the-ground melee combat. One might think it would be somewhat counterintuitive to rush at the enemy on foot with swords when you could simply blast away with all manner of futuristic firepower, but this was explained in the first film in regards to the Holtzman personal shield, and it doesn't feel stupid. It actually makes sense in Dune's universe, and I find it adequate. Bravo. So, seeing a barrage of artillery take out a base in most spectacular fashion, followed by soldiers fighting in the sand tooth and nail, was a reasonable and practical transition. No eye-rolling here. Overall, despite its nearly 3-hour runtime, I was never bored with Dune Part 2. Neither was my harem. It captured my interest and attention from start to finish. Its pacing, the characters, the plot, and most of all, the spectacle is enough to capture the minds and hearts of any moviegoer. So yes, Dune Part 2, ladies and gentlemen. Demon and Slave approved. And long live Arrakis, yes.